A significant development occurred in United States trade policy recently. A U.S. federal court, specifically the Court of International Trade, has issued a ruling that blocks President Donald Trump's widespread tariffs. This decision directly challenges the methods used by the White House to impose these import taxes. The court found that the emergency law invoked by the administration did not provide the president with the unilateral power to set tariffs on nearly every country. This ruling is a crucial check on executive actions related to international trade, an area traditionally overseen by another branch of government. The implications of this decision are far-reaching, potentially altering how future presidents approach economic sanctions and trade disputes on a global scale, creating a moment of pause and re-evaluation. The Trump administration had justified these broad tariffs by using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, commonly known as IEPA. This act, originally passed in 1977, grants the president certain powers to respond to unusual and extraordinary threats to the national security, foreign policy, or economy of the United States, which are declared as national emergencies. However, the court scrutinized this application carefully. The judges determined that the scope of IEPA, while broad, does not extend to giving the president unchecked authority to impose tariffs in the manner seen. This interpretation questions the very foundation upon which these specific trade measures were built, suggesting a potential overreach of executive authority beyond what the law originally intended for such economic powers. The court's reasoning heavily emphasized the constitutional framework of the United States government. It pointed out that the U.S. Constitution explicitly grants Congress the exclusive power to regulate commerce with foreign nations. This fundamental principle, the court argued, is not superseded by the president's authority to safeguard the economy, even under emergency declarations. The Manhattan-based court's decision underscores a clear separation of powers, reinforcing that tariff setting is fundamentally a legislative function. This ruling effectively states that the executive branch cannot unilaterally assume this power, even if it cites national emergency concerns, without clear and explicit authorization from the legislative branch for such broad tariff impositions, thus protecting congressional prerogative. The specific tariffs blocked by this important court ruling are quite extensive. They include the sweeping import taxes that were justified under the IEPA. Additionally, a separate set of levies targeting goods from China, Mexico, and Canada were also halted. The Trump administration had imposed these particular tariffs in response to what it described as issues related to drug trafficking and illegal immigration flows from these countries. It is important to note, however, that tariffs on specific goods like cars, steel, and aluminum, which were imposed under different legal authorities, were not addressed by this particular ruling. These remain in place, highlighting the targeted nature of this legal challenge and its specific focus on the use of IEEPA for broad tariff measures across the board. Section 2 Reactions Ripple, from the White House to global markets. The reaction from the Trump administration to this court decision was swift and unequivocal. Within minutes of the ruling being announced, the White House declared its intention to appeal. Kush Desai, the White House Deputy Press Secretary, articulated the administration's stance clearly. He stated, "It is not for unelected judges to decide how to properly address a national emergency. This response signals a determined effort to fight the ruling and preserve the president's authority to implement such tariffs." The administration firmly believes that its actions were necessary and justified under the circumstances of a perceived national crisis, and it views the court's intervention as an improper constraint on executive power needed to protect national interests effectively. On the other side of the political spectrum, opposition leaders and state governments involved in the lawsuit welcomed the court's decision with considerable relief. Letitia James, New York's Attorney General who represented one of the 12 states in the coalition challenging the tariffs, hailed the ruling as a victory for constitutional principles. She asserted that no president has the power to single-handedly raise taxes whenever they like. James further characterized the tariffs as a massive tax hike that would inevitably lead to inflation, significant economic damage, and considerable job losses across various sectors of the American economy. This perspective highlights the deep concerns held by many regarding the economic impact of these broad trade measures on businesses and consumers alike. The global financial markets responded positively to the news of the court blocking the tariffs. Asian stock markets saw a noticeable rise on Thursday morning, May 29, 2025, reflecting investor optimism about reduced trade tensions. Similarly, US stock futures experienced a jump, indicating a positive sentiment among American investors. The US dollar also gained strength against other major currencies like the Japanese yen and the Swiss franc. This market reaction suggests that investors perceive the ruling as a step towards greater stability and predictability in international trade relations. Stephen Innes, an analyst at SPI Asset Management, commented that the ruling provided a fresh dose of macro stability, at least until the next headline, capturing the cautious optimism in the financial world. Despite the court's ruling, the immediate changes at the border might not be instantaneous. The White House has been given a 10-day period to complete the bureaucratic process required to halt the collection of these tariffs. However, it is important to understand that most of these tariffs are currently suspended due to ongoing negotiations and previous pauses. Furthermore, John Leonard, a former top official at Customs and Border Protection, indicated that tariffs will likely still have to be paid pending the outcome of the appeal process. This means that businesses might not see immediate relief from the financial burden of these duties until the legal battle is fully resolved, which could take a considerable amount of time through the appeals courts. Section 3. Businesses on alert. The economic consequences and tariff refunds. One of the most significant potential outcomes of this court ruling, should it be upheld through the appeals process, concerns businesses that have already paid these contested tariffs. If the final decision favors the initial ruling, these businesses could be entitled to receive refunds for the tariffs they have paid, along with accrued interest. This prospect offers a glimmer of hope for many companies, particularly small and medium-sized enterprises that have struggled under the financial pressure of these additional import costs. The ruling stemmed from cases brought by entities like the Non-Partisan Liberty Justice Center, which acted on behalf of small businesses importing goods, highlighting the direct impact these tariffs have had on the commercial landscape and the financial health of various enterprises. To understand the full context, it's useful to recall the background of President Trump's tariff regime. On April 2, 2025, the administration unveiled a global tariff system. This system imposed a baseline tariff of 10% on goods from most countries. Beyond this, steeper reciprocal tariffs were applied to nations including the European Union, the United Kingdom, Canada, Mexico, and China. The situation with China was particularly intense, leading to a prolonged trade war where US tariffs on Chinese imports peaked at a staggering 145%, and Chinese retaliatory tariffs on US imports reached 125%. Although a truce has led to a reduction in these figures, with US duties on China currently at 30%, the financial strain has been considerable for many international businesses. The court's decision could also significantly disrupt the Trump administration's ongoing efforts to finalize trade deals, especially during the current 90-day tariff pause that was in effect for some negotiations. Paul Ashworth, an economist from Capital Economics, suggested that this ruling might cause other countries to adopt a wait-and-see approach. Nations currently engaged in trade talks with the US might become hesitant to make firm commitments or concessions if they believe the legal basis for US tariff threats is weakening. This uncertainty could slow down the momentum of trade negotiations and make it more challenging for the administration to achieve its desired outcomes in these international discussions, potentially altering the dynamics of global trade diplomacy significantly. Specific trade situations are also likely to be affected. For instance, the US and the UK had recently announced a deal aimed at lowering tariffs between the two nations. The legal uncertainty created by the court ruling might introduce new complexities into the implementation of such agreements. Moreover, President Trump had threatened to impose a 50% tariff on all goods imported from the European Union starting from June 2025. This deadline was extended after Ursula von der Leyen, the EU Commission chief, requested more time for trade talks. The court's decision might embolden the EU and other trading partners to stand firmer in negotiations, knowing that the president's ability to unilaterally impose tariffs is now under serious legal challenge from within the US judicial system itself. Section 4. The future of trade policy, presidential powers under scrutiny. The ruling by the Court of International Trade carries profound implications for the future scope of presidential powers, particularly concerning the use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA. By asserting that IEEPA does not grant unilateral authority to impose such broad tariffs, the court has effectively drawn a line in the sand. This decision could serve as a significant check on how future presidents interpret and utilize emergency powers for economic purposes. If upheld, it would reinforce the principle that even in perceived emergencies, executive actions must remain within the bounds set by existing laws and the Constitution. This could lead to more cautious and legally vetted approaches to international economic policy by future administrations. This landmark decision has the potential to set a strong precedent against what some observers have termed executive overreach. The court's emphasis on Congress's constitutional authority to regulate international commerce is a clear signal. Stephen Innes of SBI Asset Management noted that executive overreach may finally have found its ceiling, reflecting a sentiment that the judiciary is reasserting its role in maintaining the balance of powers. If this ruling withstands the appeals process, it could discourage future administrations from attempting to bypass congressional approval for major trade policy shifts. This could lead to a more collaborative approach between the executive and legislative branches on matters of international trade, fostering greater debate and scrutiny. The immediate next step in this legal saga is the appeals process. The Trump administration has already announced its intention to appeal the ruling, and the case will likely move through the federal appellate courts, possibly even reaching the Supreme Court. The outcome of these appeals will be critical. If the Court of International Trade's decision is affirmed, it will solidify the limitations on presidential tariff powers under IEEPA. Conversely, if the ruling is overturned, it could embolden future presidents to use emergency powers more expansively in the realm of trade. This legal battle will therefore be closely watched by legal scholars, businesses and international partners for its long-term impact on US governance and trade relations. Ultimately, this ruling, regardless of the final outcome of appeals, injects a new dynamic into the formulation of US trade policy. It highlights the ongoing tension between the executive branch's desire for decisive action in international affairs and the constitutional framework that allocates specific powers to Congress. The decision could foster a period of greater scrutiny over trade measures and potentially lead to increased stability if it encourages more legislatively grounded trade policies. For businesses and international partners, this could mean a more predictable, albeit potentially more complex, US trade environment. The significance of this ruling extends far beyond the immediate tariffs in question, touching upon the fundamental balance of power within the US government and its approach to the global economy.